At Christmas dinner, my son asked, "Mom, how are you liking the car?" I replied, "What car?" My lying daughter-in-law's face went whiter than fresh snow. Then that actress faked a dramatic fainting spell right there at the table. She just didn't expect me to find out everything. Bianca suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed backward in her chair like she was performing for an audience. The wine glass in her hand tumbled to the floor, red liquid spreading across the hardwood like spilled blood. "She's faking," I said immediately, not moving from my seat. "Mom, she wouldn't do that," Tyler said, already jumping up to help her, his chair scraping against the floor. "We need to get her to the hospital." Of course I went along. Someone had to witness this performance, and after 30 years of raising Tyler alone, I'd developed a sixth sense for detecting lies. The drive to the hospital was tense. Tyler kept checking on Bianca in the rearview mirror while she maintained her barely conscious act. I sat in the passenger seat, watching this charade unfold and feeling my suspicion grow with every fake whimper. At the hospital, Bianca lay on the gurney with her eyes fluttering dramatically. The nurses bustled around, checking her vitals while she played her part to perfection. When she finally came to, after 20 minutes of medical theater, she launched into her prepared sob story. "Honey, I'm so sorry," she whimpered to Tyler, reaching for his hand with trembling fingers. "I crashed the car that was supposed to be delivered to your mom. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to stress you out. You just got back from that business trip yesterday. And you were already so tired." Wait, what car? That's when everything clicked into place like puzzle pieces, forming a very ugly picture. Let me explain what's really going on here, because this story is more twisted than a pretzel factory having a bad day. My son Tyler is 30 years old and worth about $8 million. He built a software company from nothing. The same kid I raised working 3 jobs when his father abandoned us 27 years ago. Tyler was only 3 when Richard walked out, owing rent and leaving bills scattered everywhere like confetti after the world's worst party. I worked at a diner from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., cleaned offices from 3 to 9 p.m., and stocked shelves at the grocery store on weekends. Some nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table, still in my uniform, with Tyler's homework spread in front of me. But we made it work. Tyler was brilliant even as a kid, always tinkering with computers and talking about algorithms I didn't understand. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 years ago, Tyler's software sale to Microsoft made the local papers, a feel-good story about a local boy who made it big. The article included his photo and mentioned his company's value. Suddenly, after 27 years of complete silence, guess who shows up wanting to reconnect with his successful son? That's right, dear old dad Richard, with perfect timing and empty pockets. Tyler was so hungry for a father that he welcomed Richard with open arms. I understood why. Every kid wants to believe their absent parent left for noble reasons, not because they were a deadbeat who couldn't handle responsibility. 6 months after Richard's miraculous return, he introduced Tyler to Bianca, a sweet young woman who seemed perfect for my son. She was charming, attentive, and said all the right things about wanting a family. They dated for a year, got married in a small ceremony, and Tyler moved to another city with his new wife. He was finally living his dream of having a complete family, father, wife, the whole package. Except Tyler had bought me a car last week as an early Christmas gift. Since he was traveling for business, he asked Bianca to deliver it when she visited while he was gone. Tyler got back yesterday, and this was the first chance he'd had to ask me about it. The problem? Bianca never delivered any car, and now she's lying about crashing it. "I feel terrible," Bianca continued at the hospital, tears streaming down her face in perfectly timed drops. "The roads were so slippery from the rain, and the other driver just ran into me at that intersection near your mom's house. The mechanic said the frame was bent, and it would cost more to fix than it was worth, so I had to sell it for parts just to cover the towing." Tyler bought every word. When you're desperate for family, you'll believe anything to keep the fantasy alive. I watched my son's face as he absorbed her story, saw the concern and guilt there. He was already blaming himself for asking her to deliver the car. "Don't worry, Mom," Tyler said, looking between his wife and me with earnest eyes. "I'll get you another car, a better one. The important thing is that Bianca's okay." I bit my tongue. My brilliant son had built a tech empire from scratch, but when it came to reading people, he had the emotional intelligence of a golden retriever, trusting and completely missing the obvious tricks. As we left the hospital, I caught Bianca's reflection in the automatic doors. For just a moment, when she thought no one was looking, her helpless victim mask slipped. The expression underneath was calculating and cold, the look of someone who just successfully pulled off a con. If acting was a crime, she'd deserve an Oscar and a prison sentence. That night, as Tyler fussed over his traumatized wife and I played the part of the understanding mother-in-law, I made a decision. If my daughter-in-law thought she could con my son, she'd picked the wrong family to mess with. After all, I'd spent 30 years protecting Tyler from the world. I wasn't about to stop now, especially when the threat was sleeping in his bed and had access to his bank accounts. The game was on. The next morning, while Tyler was at the office making money and Bianca was probably rehearsing her next performance, I decided to fact-check her story. 30 years of single motherhood had taught me that when something doesn't add up, you'd better start doing the math yourself, and Bianca's story had more holes than Swiss cheese. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table with my reading glasses on, and picked up the phone. Time to channel my inner detective. Henderson Motors, this is Jake speaking. Hi, this is Helena Morrison. You delivered a car to my daughter-in-law, Bianca Morrison, about 10 days ago. A white Toyota Camry? Oh sure, the white Camry. Beautiful car, fully loaded. Is everything okay with it? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Actually, that's what I'm calling about. She mentioned there was some kind of accident? Accident? Jake's voice went up an octave, genuine confusion clear in his tone. Ma'am, I delivered that car personally to the address she provided. She was thrilled when I arrived, signed all the paperwork with the biggest smile I'd seen all week, even took photos with it, said she wanted to document the moment. My grip tightened on the phone. Photos. How nice. There was a pause. Then Jake continued. Actually, now that I think about it, she did ask some unusual questions about the resale value and how quickly someone could transfer ownership. I remember thinking it was odd, since most people don't ask about selling a car they just received, but I figured maybe she was just the planning type. Resale value. Of course she did. Little Miss Innocent had been calculating profit margins from minute one. She didn't mention any concerns about the vehicle or road conditions, I pressed. Not a one. Actually, she seemed pretty excited. Made some comment about how this was going to solve some financial problems. Jake chuckled. I remember thinking it was funny. Most people buy cars to create financial problems, not solve them. I bet it was going to solve her problems all right. The kind of problems that involved unauthorized access to other people's money. After thanking Jake and hanging up, I sat back in my chair, my suspicions confirmed like a medical diagnosis I didn't want to receive. Bianca had lied about the accident with the creativity of a fiction writer and the conscience of a pickpocket. I spent the rest of the morning researching car insurance claims and accident reports online, trying to see if there was any record of the supposed crash. Nothing. No police reports, no insurance claims, no record anywhere of an accident involving a white Toyota Camry in the past 2 weeks. When Tyler came home for lunch, I tried a careful approach, which, for me, meant not immediately calling his wife a lying thief. Honey, maybe we should help Bianca report the accident to insurance, I suggested, while he made himself a sandwich. She might be able to recover some money, even if the other driver was uninsured. She already handled all that, Mom. Tyler barely looked up from spreading mustard on his bread. She said the other driver didn't have insurance and left the scene before the police arrived. No witnesses either. One of those hit-and-run situations you hear about. How convenient. A ghost accident with a phantom driver and no witnesses. What about the police report? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom. His voice carried that warning tone I remembered from his teenage years, the same one he used when I questioned whether he'd really done his homework. Bianca was traumatized by the whole experience. She probably forgot some details or mixed them up. Can you just give her a break? Sure, I'd give her a break. Right after she gave me back my car and my peace of mind. That evening, Richard joined us for dinner, as he had most nights since moving back to town 3 years ago. Right after Tyler's success hit the papers. What a coincidence. He was telling some long, winding story about his business ventures over the past 27 years, painting himself as a misunderstood entrepreneur who'd been searching for the right opportunity. The details were vague, the timeline was fuzzy, and the whole narrative sounded like something he'd pulled from a collection of motivational posters. You know, Tyler, Richard said, cutting his steak with surgical precision, I've been thinking about that investment opportunity we discussed last week, the one that requires some upfront capital. Tyler's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. That's right, Dad. Did you need me to transfer that money we talked about? I nearly choked on my wine. Here we go again. Another episode of How to Part a Fool from His Money. starring my well-meaning but financially naive son. "Well, if you're sure it's not too much trouble, son," Richard said, with just the right amount of hesitation, "just until the deal closes next month." "Of course not. Your family." And there it was, the magic word that made Tyler's critical thinking disappear faster than free samples at Costco. Later, as I loaded the dishwasher and tried to process the evening's events, I caught a glimpse of Bianca and Richard on the back patio through the kitchen window. They were standing close together, heads bent in intense conversation. Their body language was familiar, comfortable, not like two people who were still getting to know each other. When Tyler wandered out to join them with his coffee, they immediately stepped apart like teenagers caught kissing behind the school building. The conversation switched to harmless topics: the weather, the neighbor's new fence, Tyler's work schedule. But I'd seen enough. Something was definitely going on between those two. And it had nothing to do with normal in-law bonding. The way they moved around each other, the quick glances, the seamless way they changed subjects when Tyler appeared, it all screamed conspiracy. I finished cleaning the kitchen and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept churning over the details. The missing car, the phantom accident, the convenient timing of Richard's return, the suspicious investment opportunities, and now this obvious secret communication between my son's wife and father. Individual coincidences could be explained away, but this many red flags pointed to something much bigger than a simple car accident. The question was, how deep did this go, and how much was Tyler already in? I needed concrete information about Richard's past, so the next morning I drove to our old neighborhood to see Donna Rosa. She'd lived on Maple Street for 40 years and had a memory sharper than her garden shears. If anyone could tell me the truth about Richard Morrison, it would be her. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered, the houses more worn down, but Rosa's garden was still immaculate. I found her kneeling among her rose bushes, wearing the same style of cotton dress and sun hat she'd worn for decades. "Helena!" she called out, struggling to her feet and wiping dirt from her hands. "What a surprise. What brings you back to the old neighborhood?" "I wanted to ask you about Richard," I said, deciding to cut straight to the chase. At our age, there wasn't time for extended pleasantries. Her weathered face immediately darkened like storm clouds gathering. That man, I wondered when someone would come asking about him. "Sit down, Mija. You're going to need to hear this." We settled on her front porch, the same place where she used to shell peas while keeping an eye on all the neighborhood kids. The wicker chairs creaked under our weight, and I could hear the distant sound of children playing in a nearby yard, a sound that took me back to when Tyler was small. "Richard disappeared owing 3 months' rent to Mrs. Garcia next door," Rosa began, settling into her storytelling rhythm. "Left bills scattered all over that apartment like confetti after the world's most expensive party that nobody wanted to attend. Electric company, phone company, credit cards, everyone came looking for him. He never sent money, letters, anything in all those years? Nothing. Not one word for over 2 decades. Rosa's voice carried the weight of genuine disappointment. Poor Mrs. Garcia had to clean out that apartment herself when the landlord finally gave up waiting for the rent. She found pictures of you and little Tyler just thrown in a cardboard box like yesterday's newspaper. Some were torn, some had coffee stains on them, like they meant nothing to him. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. Tyler had spent years wondering if his father ever thought about him, creating elaborate fantasies about why Richard had left and whether he'd ever come back. Here was the brutal truth. Richard had literally thrown their pictures away like garbage. "Mrs. Garcia brought the photos to me," Rosa continued. "Thought maybe you'd want them someday. I still have them in my house if you want to see them." I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Tyler didn't need to see physical evidence of how little he'd meant to his father. "He was always a smooth talker," Rosa said, her tone shifting to disgust. "Had big dreams, bigger mouth, could convince you that black was white and up was down if you listened long enough. But when it came time to pay up or show up, he'd vanish like smoke. And now he's back, right after Tyler's picture was in the paper 3 years ago. Funny timing, no?" Rosa's eyes flashed with anger. 27 years of silence, then suddenly he wants to be Father of the Year the minute his son gets rich. Did anyone else around here hear from him over the years? Any mutual friends or relatives? Nobody. And trust me, in this neighborhood, news travels faster than gossip at a church social. If Richard had contacted anyone, I would have heard about it. Rosa leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There were rumors, though. Mrs. Garcia's nephew works for a collection agency, and he said Richard's name popped up on their lists several times over the years. Different cities, always owing money, always disappearing when things got tough. The picture was becoming clearer, and it wasn't pretty. Richard wasn't a man who'd made mistakes and learned from them. He was a professional disappointment, someone who made a career out of using people and moving on when the well ran dry. I thanked Rosa and promised to visit again soon, but my mind was already racing as I drove home. I had solid information now, but I knew Tyler wasn't ready to hear it. He'd spent his whole life crafting a story about why his father left. Maybe Richard was young and scared. Maybe he felt unworthy. Maybe he was protecting them somehow. The truth was much simpler and much uglier. Richard was a user who'd abandoned his family because responsibility was inconvenient. When I got home, Tyler was in the living room with his laptop, probably working on his next million while his parasites planned how to spend it. "Mom, where have you been? I tried calling your cell." "Just visiting old friends and taking a trip down memory lane." I settled into my favorite chair, studying his face. "Tyler, we need to talk about your father." His expression immediately hardened like concrete setting in the sun. "Mom, please. I know you have concerns, but he's trying. Can't you see that? He's been nothing but supportive since he came back. He abandoned you for 27 years, Tyler. 27 years without so much as a birthday card or a phone call." "People change, Mom." Tyler's voice took on that defensive tone he used when he felt cornered. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he felt like he'd already messed up too badly to reach out. Maybe he thought we were better off without him. But he came back 3 years ago, and he's been trying to make up for lost time ever since. I wanted to tell him about Rosa, about the thrown-away pictures and unpaid bills, about the collection agencies and the pattern of using people. But I could see Tyler wasn't ready to hear it. He'd invested too much emotionally in this reunion to accept that it might be built on lies. "Just be careful with your money, okay?" I said instead. "Don't make any big financial decisions without thinking them through twice." "Mom, I'm 30 years old. I built a multi-million-dollar company from the ground up. I think I can handle my own finances." "I know you can. I'm not questioning your business sense. I'm questioning their motives." "Their motives?" Tyler's voice rose slightly. "Mom, I need this. I need to believe that families can be fixed, that people can change, that it's not too late to have the father I always wanted." And there it was, the heart of the matter. Tyler wasn't just welcoming Richard back. He was trying to heal a wound that had been bleeding for 27 years. The problem was that Richard might be pouring salt into that wound instead of helping it heal. That was the real tragedy. Tyler was so focused on the family he thought he could have that he couldn't see what was happening to the family he actually had. And I was starting to suspect that this blindness wasn't accidental. It was being carefully cultivated by two people who knew exactly which buttons to push. The next afternoon, I decided it was time for some field research. I told Tyler I was going shopping at the mall. Technically true, since I did plan to buy a coffee and maybe a magazine. What I didn't mention was that I'd be conducting my own little surveillance operation. I positioned myself at a table in the food court with a clear view of the main entrance, like a spider waiting patiently in her web. I'd brought a book and reading glasses to look like any other grandmother killing time, but my attention was focused on watching for familiar faces. After sitting there for over an hour, nursing an overpriced latte and watching teenagers make questionable fashion choices, I spotted them. Bianca walked in first, looking around nervously like she was meeting a drug dealer instead of her father-in-law. She was dressed casually, but still looked out of place, checking her phone every few seconds. Richard appeared about 10 minutes later, scanning the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to watch for trouble. When he spotted Bianca, they didn't wave or show any obvious signs of recognition. Instead, they moved toward each other with the choreographed casualness of people who'd done this before. They chose a table near the Barnes & Noble entrance, partially hidden behind a decorative pillar, but with clear sight lines to the exits. Professional paranoia or guilty consciences? I was betting on the latter. I moved closer, abandoning my book and pretending to browse the jewelry kiosk about 20 feet away. My hearing wasn't what it used to be, but I caught fragments of their conversation carried on the mall's echo. "Told you we needed to be more careful. She's asking too many questions." Tyler's starting to notice the patterns. My heart rate spiked. They were talking about me, and they were talking about Tyler noticing something. Noticing what? The financial irregularities? The timing coincidences? The way they seemed to communicate without words? I fumbled with my phone, trying to get a decent photo without being obvious about it. My camera skills were roughly equivalent to my ability to perform brain surgery, but I managed to capture one blurry image that clearly showed both their faces and their intense conversation. When I got home, Tyler was in his office on a video call with clients in California. I waited until he finished, then knocked on his door with what I hoped was casual maternal concern. "Hey, honey. Look what I saw at the mall today." I showed him the photo on my phone screen. Tyler squinted at the blurry image, then looked at me with mild exasperation. "Mom, they're family now. Of course they talk to each other, and this photo is so blurry I can barely tell who it is. But look at their body language. They're leaning in like they're sharing secrets. Maybe they were planning a surprise for you. Or maybe Dad needed advice about something and didn't want to bother me while I was working." Tyler's ability to find innocent explanations for suspicious behavior was truly a gift, the kind of gift that made people easy targets for con artists. "Tyler, doesn't it seem strange that your father came back right when you became successful, after 27 years of nothing?" He looked up from his computer with the tired patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "Mom, I love you, but this paranoia has to stop. Dad and Bianca are both important to me, and I need you to try to accept that." I realized my evidence was weak. A blurry photo of two people talking wasn't exactly smoking gun material. It was more like a slightly warm BB gun that might have been fired recently. That night, I lay awake thinking about Tyler's finances. I knew he trusted Bianca completely with their household money. As his wife, she had access to their joint accounts and often handled paperwork while he focused on running his business. Tyler had always been generous about delegating tasks he found boring, and apparently, financial management fell into that category. But what if that trust was being systematically abused? What if those boring financial tasks included unauthorized transfers and questionable investments? Tyler might not notice small amounts going missing, especially if they were disguised as legitimate business expenses or family needs. I made a mental note to find a way to examine Tyler's financial records more closely, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, but because I was starting to suspect that his privacy had already been invaded by people with much worse intentions than mine. The problem was figuring out how to do it without Tyler feeling like I was crossing a line. He was already defensive about Richard and Bianca. If he thought I was spying on his finances, he might cut me out of his life entirely. But if I was right about what was happening, Tyler might not have a financial life left to cut me out of. The next morning, I called my old friend Margaret, whose son was an accountant. If I was going to investigate financial fraud, I needed to understand what signs to look for. "Margaret, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to steal money from a family member without them noticing right away, how would they do it?" "Helena, what's going on?" "Just humor me, hypothetically." Margaret sighed. "Well, small amounts over time would be the smart way, maybe disguised as legitimate expenses or investments. Set up automatic transfers that the victim approves once and then forgets about. Use joint accounts where both people have access, but only one person pays attention to the details." My blood ran cold. That sounded exactly like Tyler's situation with Bianca. "The key," Margaret continued, "would be finding someone who trusts completely and doesn't like dealing with financial paperwork. Someone successful enough that small amounts wouldn't be missed immediately. And how would someone catch this kind of theft? Look for patterns in the bank statements, transfers that happen regularly but don't correspond to known expenses. Check for new accounts or investments that the victim doesn't remember authorizing. Compare signatures on financial documents." I thanked Margaret and hung up, my mind already forming a plan. I needed to get a look at Tyler's financial records, but I had to be smart about it. If Bianca and Richard were running a long con on my son, I needed evidence that would convince Tyler before it was too late. The question was, how much time did I have before they decided they'd taken enough and disappeared, leaving Tyler broke and heartbroken? I decided to take a different approach and went back to the coffee shop several times over the next week, hoping to learn more about Bianca and Richard's relationship. Each time, I brought a different book and tried to look like any other customer having a literary moment instead of conducting amateur surveillance worthy of a discount spy novel. On my third attempt, after consuming enough caffeine to power a small aircraft, I finally spotted them again. This time, I was more strategic about positioning myself, close enough to observe but hidden behind a display of travel mugs and seasonal merchandise. The teenage barista, a girl with purple hair and multiple ear piercings, was wiping down tables nearby with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be literally anywhere else. I decided to take a calculated risk. "Excuse me," I said when she approached my table with her cleaning cloth. "That couple over there, they come here a lot, don't they?" She glanced over and nodded without much interest. "Oh yeah, those two. They're here pretty regularly. maybe once or twice a week, always order the same thing. Black coffee for him, caramel macchiato for her. They tip okay, but they always seem kind of stressed about something. They seem familiar somehow. How long have they been coming here? The girl thought for a moment, her face scrunching up in concentration. I've been working here for about 18 months, and they were already regulars when I started. So at least that long, maybe longer. They definitely have that been doing this forever vibe. You know? That timeline would put their relationship back to before Bianca even met Tyler, or at least very early in their courtship. Interesting. Like finding out your favorite restaurant had been serving cat food the whole time. Technically possible, but highly suspicious. They always seem so serious when they talk, I commented, trying to keep my voice casual. Yeah, they do. And they never really seem happy to see each other, if you know what I mean. Like, not like family or friends would be. More like, she paused, searching for the right comparison. Like business partners who don't particularly like each other, but need each other for something. Business partners. That phrase hit me like a cold slap across the face. They always sit in that same corner, the girl continued, warming to the subject now that she had an audience. And they're always looking around, like they're worried someone might overhear them. Kinda paranoid, actually. I thanked her and sat back in my chair, processing this information like a computer analyzing data. Bianca and Richard had been meeting regularly for at least 18 months, possibly longer. They acted like business partners rather than family members. They chose secluded seating and watched for eavesdroppers. This wasn't the beginning of a beautiful friendship between in-laws. This was evidence of a long-term partnership that predated Bianca's relationship with Tyler. When I got home, I found Tyler in his home office, signing a stack of papers with the mechanical precision of someone performing a familiar routine. The sight made my stomach clench. What are those? I asked, trying to sound casual rather than alarmed. Just some financial stuff Bianca prepared for me, Tyler said without looking up. Investment paperwork, expense reports, tax documents. You know how I hate dealing with all the administrative details. Gives me a headache just thinking about it. I watched him sign document after document without reading them, trusting his wife's explanations completely. Tyler, do you actually review these before you sign them? Bianca explains them to me, he said, finally glancing up with mild irritation. She's got a good head for numbers, and she knows I trust her judgment completely. Why would I need to read every line when I have someone I trust handling the details? But shouldn't you at least skim them? Just to know what you're agreeing to? Tyler's expression shifted to the patient tolerance of someone explaining obvious concepts to a slow child. Mom, I trust my wife. She handles our personal finances so I can focus on growing the business. It's called division of labor. She's good with money management. I'm good with technology and client relations. The innocent logic was heartbreaking. Tyler had built his entire financial life on the assumption that the people closest to him had his best interests at heart. It was a beautiful philosophy and a terrible vulnerability. Besides, Tyler added, returning to his signing, Bianca shows me the important stuff. These are just routine transfers and investment adjustments. Routine transfers. My blood pressure spiked like a rocket launching. That evening at dinner, Richard mentioned his investment opportunity again, as he had every few days for the past month. The details were always vague but promising. The timeline was always urgent, and the amount needed always seemed to increase slightly each time it came up. Tyler, that real estate deal I mentioned is moving faster than expected, Richard said, cutting his pot roast with surgical precision. The seller wants to close by the end of next week, which means I need to move on it sooner than we discussed. No problem, Dad. Tyler's response was immediate and generous, like someone offering to share an appetizer rather than potentially signing away tens of thousands of dollars. Just let me know how much and when you need it transferred. I watched this exchange with growing alarm that was setting off every internal warning system I possessed. Tyler was essentially giving Richard unlimited access to his bank account, and Richard was responding with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. I really appreciate this, son, Richard said, his voice carrying just the right amount of gratitude and paternal pride. It means everything to me that you trust me with something this important. Trust. The magic word that made Tyler's critical thinking disappear faster than free samples at a grocery store. As I loaded the dishwasher later and tried to process the evening's revelations, I realized I was running out of time. Richard and Bianca weren't just taking advantage of Tyler's generosity. They were systematically dismantling his financial security while he signed the paperwork that made it all legal. The question was no longer whether they were stealing from Tyler. The question was how much they'd already taken and how much time I had left to stop them before they disappeared with his life savings, leaving him broke and wondering how his perfect family had turned into his perfect nightmare. I needed concrete evidence, and I needed it fast. Because Tyler's trust fund was about to become Tyler's tragedy, and I was the only one who could see the train wreck coming. The next morning, I decided it was time to confront Tyler with everything I'd gathered so far. I spread the evidence across his kitchen table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. The photo from the coffee shop, my notes from the conversation with Jake at the dealership, the timeline discrepancies, and my growing list of financial red flags. Tyler walked into the kitchen in his bathrobe, expecting his usual quiet breakfast, and found me sitting there with what looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream laid out in front of me. "Mom, what's all this?" he asked, pouring himself coffee and eyeing my makeshift evidence board with the wariness of someone who'd walked into an intervention. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing for him to sit down. "Really talk about your father and Bianca and what I think is happening to your money." "Mom, this is getting ridiculous," Tyler said. But he sat down anyway, probably hoping to humor me into dropping the subject. "You're talking about Dad and Bianca like they're running some kind of elaborate scam instead of just trying to be my family. Look at the pattern, Tyler." I pointed to my timeline notes. "Your father disappeared for 27 years and came back within months of your business success, making the newspapers. Bianca handles all your finances, and you sign whatever she puts in front of you without reading it. They meet regularly in secret and have known each other longer than you realize." "So what?" Tyler's voice was getting that defensive edge I remembered from his teenage years. "Maybe Dad introduced us when he first came back. Maybe that's how Bianca and I met in the first place. And yes, I trust my wife with our money. That's what married people do when they're not busy being paranoid detectives." Tyler stood up abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking his backyard. His shoulders were tense, and I could see the conflict playing out in his posture. Love warring with logic, hope battling against growing doubt. "Mom, do you have any idea what it was like growing up without a father?" His voice cracked slightly, revealing the little boy who still lived inside my successful grown son. "Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering if he'd ever come back? If he even remembered I existed?" My heart broke for him all over again. "Tyler, I know." "No, you don't know," he continued, turning to face me with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You had to be both parents, and you did an amazing job, but I still felt that hole where a father should have been. Every school play, every birthday, every graduation, I looked for him in the crowd, even though I knew he wouldn't be there. And now he's here." Tyler's voice grew stronger, more determined. "He wants to be part of my life. He's trying to make up for lost time, trying to be the father I always needed. And you're asking me to throw that away because of some vague suspicions and blurry photographs? They're not vague, Tyler. They're specific, and they're adding up to something very concerning. To you, maybe, but to me, they look like coincidences and misunderstandings." Tyler sat back down, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Mom, I need this to work. I need to believe that families can be fixed, that people can change, that it's not too late to have the relationships I always wanted." That afternoon, as if summoned by some cosmic sense of timing, Bianca came to see me while Tyler was at work. She knocked on my door with her usual sweet smile, but today it seemed strained around the edges. "Helena, can we talk? I'm worried about Tyler." I invited her in, curious to see what angle she'd take this time. She settled on my couch with the careful positioning of someone who'd rehearsed this scene. "He's been so stressed lately," she said, folding her hands in her lap like a well-behaved schoolgirl. "I think all this tension between us is really affecting him. He's not sleeping well, and he's been distracted at work." The audacity was breathtaking. This woman was potentially robbing my son blind, and she was sitting in my living room expressing concern for his well-being. "I understand that it's difficult to share Tyler with new people," she continued, her voice dripping with practiced empathy. "You've had him to yourself for so long, been his whole world. It must be hard to adjust to him having a wife and reconnecting with his father. I just want what's best for Tyler," I said carefully, studying her face for any tells. "So do I. That's why I think maybe you should consider taking a step back." Her words were gentle, but there was steel underneath. "Tyler mentioned that you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe some time away would be good for everyone? Sometimes distance gives us perspective we can't get when we're too close to a situation." Translation: "Make yourself scarce while we finish whatever financial magic trick we're performing with your son's bank account." "Are you suggesting I'm imagining things?" I asked, keeping my voice level and watching her reaction. Of course not. The response was too quick, too bright. But sometimes when we're worried about losing someone we love, we can see threats that aren't really there. It's natural, but it's not always accurate. She was smoother than I'd expected, laying groundwork to discredit my concerns without directly attacking my mental state. This was professional-level manipulation disguised as family concern. "I'll think about what you've said," I lied, with the sincerity of a politician making campaign promises. After she left, I sat in my living room, feeling like I was in a chess game where my opponent could see moves I didn't even know existed. Bianca was trying to isolate Tyler by making him think I was becoming unstable and paranoid. Meanwhile, Richard was positioning himself as the stable, supportive father Tyler had always craved. They weren't just stealing Tyler's money. They were stealing his family connections, his support system, his ability to trust his own instincts. By the time they were finished, Tyler would be emotionally and financially devastated, wondering how the people he'd loved most had turned out to be the ones who hurt him worst. I was running out of time faster than Tyler was running out of money, and I still didn't have the smoking gun I needed to convince him. But I was starting to formulate a plan that might give me exactly the evidence I needed, if I was brave enough to execute it and smart enough not to get caught. The game was escalating, and it was time for me to make a bold move. Bianca had made one critical mistake in our little chat. She'd revealed that she wanted me out of the picture, at least temporarily. Like a magician accidentally showing the audience how the trick worked, she'd given me valuable information about their strategy. Time to use that information to my advantage. I called Tyler that evening and put on my best defeated mother voice, the one I'd used when he was 16, and thought he knew everything about everything. "Honey, I've been thinking about what Bianca said today. Maybe she's right. Maybe I do need to get away for a while and gain some perspective on this whole situation." "Mom, you don't have to," Tyler started, but I could hear the relief in his voice underneath the protest. "No, I think it would be good for all of us. I'm going to visit your Aunt Marie in Phoenix. Give everyone some space to breathe, and maybe clear my head a bit." Tyler was quiet for a moment, probably processing the unexpected turn of events. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel like we're pushing you away." "Of course not, sweetheart. I just think some distance might help me see things more clearly. Sometimes when you're too close to a situation, you can't see the forest for the trees." "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll pack tonight and get an early start. The drive will give me time to think." After hanging up, I spent the evening carefully planning what would either be the smartest or stupidest thing I'd ever done. I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a week-long trip, made a show of calling Aunt Marie to confirm my visit where Tyler could overhear, and even printed out MapQuest directions to Phoenix. The next morning, I loaded my suitcase into the car while Richard and Bianca watched from Tyler's front window. I could see them standing there like vultures eyeing fresh roadkill, probably congratulating themselves on successfully manipulating the troublesome mother-in-law into removing herself from the equation. I even waved goodbye with the enthusiasm of someone heading off to a relaxing vacation instead of staging the world's most obvious fake departure. Then I drove around the block, parked behind the old oak tree that blocked the view from Tyler's house, and settled in to wait. If patience was a virtue, I was about to become a saint. If stupidity was a crime, I was about to become a felon. At exactly 10 a.m., Tyler's usual departure time for his Tuesday morning client meetings, I watched his car disappear down the street. I gave him an extra 10 minutes to clear the neighborhood, then used my spare key to sneak back into the house like a reverse burglar breaking into her own son's home. The living room was empty, but I could hear Richard and Bianca talking in the kitchen, their voices more relaxed than I'd ever heard them. They were probably celebrating their victory over the suspicious mother-in-law who'd finally been neutralized. I needed concrete evidence, something Tyler couldn't dismiss or rationalize away with his impressive collection of optimistic explanations. I carefully made my way to Tyler's home office, where he kept his important papers and sometimes worked on his laptop when he wanted to avoid distractions. Tyler's filing system was organized, but not obsessive. He had folders for different types of documents, but wasn't paranoid about security within his own home. Why would he be? He trusted the people who had access to his house and his life. I started with the investment folder, pulling out the documents Richard had given Tyler to review over the past few months. Under the fluorescent desk light, with time to examine them carefully, several things immediately stood out. The letterheads looked professionally designed, but generic, the kind of thing someone could create with basic computer software rather than actual corporate branding. The contact information led to P.O. boxes and answering services rather than real business addresses. Most damning, several of the investment opportunities were for companies I couldn't find any trace of online, despite Tyler's fast internet connection and my admittedly amateur detective skills. I took photos of the most suspicious documents with my phone, building a case one questionable contract at a time. Then, I heard voices getting louder in the living room, and my heart rate spiked like I'd just chugged espresso. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept closer to the doorway and positioned myself where I could listen without being seen. "Told you we needed to be more careful after that coffee shop incident," Bianca was saying, her voice carrying a stress I'd never heard before. "She's been watching us. Richard, taking photos, asking questions at the dealership. She's gone now," Richard replied, with the confidence of someone who thought he'd won a chess match. "And Tyler's completely under our control. He signs whatever you put in front of him without reading it, trusts every word we say. The kid's desperate for family. It makes him easier to manipulate than a puppet show." My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone's recording function. This was it, the smoking gun I'd been searching for. "But what if she comes back with more questions?" Bianca pressed. "What if she actually finds something concrete?" "She won't. And even if she does, Tyler won't believe her. The kid's too invested in this happy family fantasy to see what's right in front of him. He'd rather be broke and loved than rich and alone. How much more do you think we can take before he notices the patterns? Another 50,000, maybe 75 if we're smart about the timing. The beauty of this setup is that Tyler doesn't want to look too closely at the details. He's paying us to rob him." I managed to record about 10 minutes of their conversation before they moved to another room, discussing the timeline for their next phase and how to handle Tyler's increasing questions about money without arousing more suspicion. The recording wasn't just evidence of theft. It was proof of a calculated, long-term conspiracy to systematically destroy my son's financial life while playing on his deepest emotional needs. As I snuck back to my car, my phone clutched in my hand like a weapon that could save Tyler's future. I realized that the hardest part wasn't over. I had the evidence I needed, but now I had to figure out how to present it in a way that would finally open Tyler's eyes without destroying him in the process. Because while Richard and Bianca saw Tyler as an easy mark, I saw him as my son. And I was about to prove that protecting your family was a job that never ended, no matter how old your children got or how successful they became. I drove straight to Tyler's office with my phone clutched in my hand, like evidence that could change everything, because that's exactly what it was. The recording was damning enough to convince any reasonable person, but I knew Tyler wasn't operating on pure reason when it came to his father and wife. The office building's lobby was busy with the usual Tuesday morning traffic. People in business attire hurrying to meetings, delivery drivers with packages, the low hum of professional ambition in motion. I felt completely out of place, like an amateur detective who'd stumbled into a real crime scene. "Mom?" Tyler looked up in surprise as I walked into his office without knocking. "I thought you were driving to Phoenix today." "I was," I said, closing his office door behind me and turning the lock with deliberate emphasis. "But something came up that couldn't wait. Something that's going to change everything." Tyler's face immediately tensed, like he was bracing for impact. "Mom, if this is more conspiracy theories about Dad and Bianca, just listen." I pulled out my phone and set it on his desk between us like a bomb waiting to explode. "Really listen, without interrupting or immediately thinking of 17 different innocent explanations." Tyler leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defensively. "Fine, but this better be good." I pressed play on the recording. Richard's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "She's gone now. And Tyler's completely under our control. He signs whatever you put in front of him without reading it." Tyler went very still, like a computer that had just encountered a fatal error. Bianca's voice came next. "What if she comes back with more questions?" "Richard, Tyler won't believe her. The kid's too invested in this happy family fantasy to see what's right in front of him. He'd rather be broke and loved than rich and alone." Tyler's face went pale as he listened to the people he trusted most, discussing him like he was a mark in a con game rather than a son and husband they supposedly loved. "How much more do you think we can take before he notices?" Bianca's recorded voice asked. "Another 50,000, maybe 75 if we're smart about the timing." The beauty of this setup is that Tyler doesn't want to look too closely at the details. He's paying us to rob him. By the time the recording ended, Tyler was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He stared at my phone like it contained footage of his own betrayal in high definition. That's really them?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, I recorded this 2 hours ago at your house, after they thought I'd left for Phoenix. Tyler was quiet for a long time, staring out his office window at a world that had just shifted completely off its axis. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless, like a computer reading data. They really think I'm that easy to manipulate? I'm afraid so. I reached across the desk and touched his hand gently. And Tyler, I've been looking at those investment documents Richard gave you. I think you need to have them examined by someone who knows about financial fraud, someone with more expertise than my suspicious mother instincts. The investments, you think they're all fake? I think you need to verify everything before you sign anything else. Some of those companies don't seem to exist anywhere but on paper. Tyler ran his hands through his hair, looking lost and betrayed, and about 10 years older than he had that morning. How long have they been planning this? How much have I already lost? I don't know for sure, but based on what I've learned, probably longer than we want to think about. What do I do now? The question came out like a plea from someone who just discovered that his entire reality was built on lies. First, we secure your finances immediately. Change all your passwords, freeze any accounts they have access to, and don't sign anything else without having it reviewed by your lawyer. Then we figure out exactly what they've already taken and whether we can get any of it back. Tyler nodded slowly, but I could see the devastation in his eyes. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, love, family, and every hope he'd nurtured for the past 3 years. I really believed Dad wanted to know me, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Maybe part of him does, Tyler. People are complicated, but that doesn't excuse what they're doing to you. And Bianca, I trusted her with everything. Our future, our money, our entire life together. I know you did. And that's not your fault. That's what people do when they love someone. You're supposed to be able to trust your family. Tyler was quiet for another moment, processing the magnitude of what we'd discovered. What if we're wrong about everything? What if there's some explanation for all this? Then we'll find out when we investigate properly with qualified professionals. But Tyler, you heard that recording. Even if they're not stealing from you, which I think they are, they're definitely manipulating you and laughing about it behind your back. He nodded reluctantly, like someone accepting a medical diagnosis they didn't want to receive. Yeah, I heard it. We can get through this, I told him, squeezing his hand. We've gotten through worse things together, and we'll get through this too, but we have to be smart about how we handle it. Tyler looked at me with something that might have been respect mixed with gratitude. I should have listened to you sooner. You weren't ready to hear it then, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to learn things in our own time, even when the tuition is expensive. How expensive do you think this lesson is going to be? We'll find out. But Tyler, whatever the cost, you're going to survive this. And you're going to be smarter and stronger because of it. He managed a weak smile. Promise? Promise. Now let's go save what's left of your fortune before they decide to take the rest of it and disappear into the sunset. As we prepared to leave his office and begin the process of untangling the financial web that Richard and Bianca had woven around Tyler's life, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Sadness for the family dreams that were about to be shattered, but determination to protect my son from any further damage. The real fight was just beginning. We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening securing Tyler's finances like we were building a fortress against an invading army. Tyler called his bank, his investment advisor, and his lawyer, explaining the situation with the grim efficiency of someone who'd just discovered his house was on fire. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd feared, but not quite as catastrophic as it could have been. Tyler had been systematically robbed, but his business acumen had saved him from total financial ruin. He'd kept his company accounts separate from his personal finances, which meant Richard and Bianca had only been able to access a portion of his wealth. Look at this, Tyler said, spreading bank statements across his dining room table like evidence in a murder trial. I remember Bianca telling me these transfers were for tax planning purposes, putting money aside for quarterly payments. But looking at them now, the transfers totaled nearly $75,000 over the past year, going to accounts that Tyler couldn't clearly identify. The amounts were strategically small enough to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts, but they added up to more than most people made in 2 years. And these investment documents from Dad, Tyler continued, examining Richard's paperwork with the scrutiny he should have applied months ago. Half of these companies don't exist. The other half are legitimate businesses, but the account numbers and contact information have been altered. It was a sophisticated scam that took advantage of Tyler's trust and his dislike of financial paperwork. They'd created a paper trail that looked legitimate on the surface but fell apart under careful examination. We also discovered that several of Tyler's credit cards had charges he didn't remember authorizing. Dinners at expensive restaurants, hotel stays, shopping sprees, all signed with his name, but in handwriting that looked slightly different from his usual signature. "I feel like the biggest fool in the world," Tyler said, slumping back in his chair. "You're not a fool. You're someone who loved people who didn't deserve it. There's a difference." "But I should have been more careful. I should have paid attention instead of just trusting blindly." "Tyler, hindsight is always perfect. The important thing is that we caught this before they could take everything." That evening, Tyler made the difficult decision to confront Richard and Bianca directly. Despite my concerns about their potential reactions, Tyler felt he needed to give them one last chance to explain themselves before involving law enforcement. "I need to hear them try to justify this," he told me. "I need to understand how they could look me in the eye every day while systematically robbing me blind." We agreed that I would stay hidden in the kitchen while Tyler confronted them in the living room, and that Tyler would record the conversation on his phone. If things got heated or dangerous, I would call the police immediately. When Tyler arrived home, Richard and Bianca were watching television like any normal couple enjoying a quiet evening. They looked up with welcoming smiles when Tyler walked in, completely unaware that their world was about to implode. "How was your day, honey?" Bianca asked, patting the couch cushion beside her. "You look tired." "I had an interesting day," Tyler said, remaining standing. "Mom decided not to go to Phoenix after all." I saw Richard and Bianca exchange the quickest of glances, a micro-expression of alarm that they tried to hide behind polite surprise. "Oh," Bianca said, her voice slightly higher than usual. That's unexpected. Is everything okay?" "Actually, no. Everything is not okay." Tyler pulled out his phone and set it on the coffee table. "I think we need to have a conversation about money and investments and trust and how sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you worst." "Tyler, what's wrong?" Richard asked. But there was a note of caution in his voice now, like someone who just realized they might be walking into a trap. "I've been reviewing our financial records, and I have some questions that need answers." What followed was 20 minutes of the most uncomfortable television I'd ever witnessed. Tyler methodically presented the evidence while Richard and Bianca went through the classic stages of getting caught: denial, deflection, minimization, and finally, desperate justification. "We were going to pay it back," Bianca insisted when the lies became impossible to maintain. "It was just temporary, just until we got back on our feet." "You have more money than you know what to do with," Richard added, his mask finally slipping to reveal the calculating opportunist underneath. "We just needed to borrow a little to handle some financial emergencies." "Borrowed?" Tyler's voice was rising now, 3 years of suppressed doubt finally finding expression. "You stole from me. You lied to me. You manipulated me while I signed the paperwork that made your theft legal." "We're family," Richard said, playing his last desperate card. "Family helps each other through difficult times. Family doesn't steal from each other and then lie about it for months." The conversation devolved into accusations and recriminations that made daytime talk shows look civilized. Richard became increasingly aggressive, arguing that Tyler owed him for the years he'd missed, like charging compound interest on parental abandonment. Bianca alternated between tears and anger, claiming that Tyler had never really loved her anyway and that she'd just been trying to secure their future. It was uglier than a custody battle and twice as painful to watch, but it was also revealing. Any remaining doubt about their guilt disappeared as they essentially confessed while trying to justify their actions. Tyler finally asked them to leave, and this time there was no question that it was permanent. "You'll regret this," Richard said as he headed for the door, delivering threats like a villain in a bad movie. "You're choosing that bitter old woman over your own family." "No," Tyler replied with quiet dignity. "I'm choosing the family that never lied to me over the family that did." After they left, Tyler and I sat in his living room processing what had just happened. The house felt different somehow, emptier, but cleaner, like a fever had finally broken. "I keep thinking I should feel angrier," Tyler said, staring at his hands. "But mostly I just feel empty." "That's normal. Betrayal is complicated." "Betrayal? It's not just about the money. It's about trust and love and all the things you thought were real. How do I ever trust anyone again? How do I know if someone loves me for me or for my bank account?" "You don't know for certain, but you can't let their betrayal turn you into someone who's afraid to love or trust ever again. That would be letting them win twice." As we sat together in the quiet house, I realized that while we'd lost Richard and Bianca, we'd gained something more valuable: the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most expensive gift you can give someone, but also the most necessary. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations, financial audits, and police reports. Tyler's lawyer recommended involving law enforcement immediately, since the evidence of systematic theft was overwhelming, and the amounts involved crossed the threshold into felony territory. "We need to move quickly," the lawyer explained during our meeting at his downtown office. "Financial fraud cases are easier to prosecute when the trail is fresh and the perpetrators haven't had time to hide assets or flee the jurisdiction." Tyler was still reluctant to see his father and wife arrested, despite everything they'd done. The little boy inside him, who'd waited 27 years for his daddy to come home, was having trouble accepting that daddy had only returned to rob him blind. "They're still my family," Tyler said during one particularly difficult conversation. "Doesn't that count for something?" "Tyler," I said gently, "they stopped being your family the moment they decided to steal from you. Real family doesn't do what they did." The investigation revealed the full scope of Richard and Bianca's operation. They hadn't just been stealing from Tyler, they'd been running multiple small cons throughout the city, taking advantage of lonely people looking for love or family connections. Tyler was their biggest score, but he wasn't their only victim. Police found evidence that Richard had been using fake identities and forged documents for years, moving from city to city when his schemes fell apart. Bianca had a shorter criminal history, but showed a talent for emotional manipulation that made her the perfect partner for Richard's financial scams. They were a team, Detective Martinez explained. Richard would identify wealthy, lonely targets, and Bianca would get close to them emotionally while Richard handled the financial side. They'd been working together for at least 3 years before they targeted your son. The timeline made me sick. Bianca hadn't fallen in love with Tyler and then gotten corrupted by Richard. She'd been part of the plan from the beginning, playing a role designed to make Tyler vulnerable to his father's manipulation. Within a week, both Richard and Bianca were arrested. The local news picked up the story, painting Tyler as a successful businessman who'd been victimized by his own family. The attention was unwelcome, but necessary. It encouraged other victims to come forward and helped build a stronger case against the perpetrators. Tyler struggled with the media coverage, feeling like his private tragedy had become public entertainment. "Everyone's going to think I'm an idiot," he said after a particularly sensationalized news report. "Let them think what they want," I replied. "The people who matter know the truth. You were a loving son and husband who got taken advantage of by professional criminals." The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. Both Richard and Bianca were offered plea deals rather than face trial, probably because their lawyers knew the evidence against them was overwhelming. Richard received 18 months in prison, Bianca got 12 months, and they were ordered to pay restitution. Tyler was able to recover about $45,000 of the stolen money through asset forfeiture and frozen bank accounts. The rest was gone, spent on living expenses, legal fees, and the cost of maintaining their elaborate deception. "It's not about the money," Tyler said when the final settlement was announced. $45,000, $20,000, $5,000, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I was stupid enough to let them do this to me. You weren't stupid. You were hopeful, and hope isn't a character flaw, even when it gets you hurt. Is it, though? Maybe being more suspicious, more cynical, would have saved me from all this. And it also would have saved you from ever experiencing real love or trust or family connection. Tyler, you can't let their betrayal turn you into someone who's afraid to open his heart. The hardest part wasn't the money or the legal proceedings. It was watching Tyler struggle with his sense of identity. He'd built his adult life around the belief that he was smart, successful, and capable of good judgment. Discovering that he'd been manipulated so completely shook his confidence in ways that would take time to rebuild. "How do I know if my business decisions are sound?" he asked one evening. "How do I know if I'm making good choices or just getting lucky? Maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was." "Tyler, you built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. You created something valuable that improved people's lives and made you wealthy in the process. That doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen to stupid people. But I couldn't see through my own wife and father, because you loved them, and love makes us vulnerable. That's not a bug in your personality. It's a feature. The capacity to love deeply is what makes you human." Slowly, very slowly, Tyler began to heal. The sharp edges of betrayal softened into acceptance, and acceptance gradually transformed into wisdom. He started sleeping better, laughing more, and making plans for a future that didn't include people who saw him as a financial opportunity rather than a human being. 3 months after Richard and Bianca's arrest, Tyler and I were having dinner at his house, just the two of us, the way it used to be before his life became a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. "You know what's funny?" Tyler said, twirling pasta around his fork. "I keep expecting to miss them. The idea of family dinners, having people around, all that domestic bliss I thought I wanted. And do you miss them? No. This feels more like family than anything we had when they were here. No wondering about hidden agendas. No walking on eggshells. No worrying about what they really want from me. That's because this is real," I said. "No performance, no manipulation, no ulterior motives. Just us. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you sooner. You weren't ready to hear it, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way, even when the tuition costs tens of thousands of dollars." Tyler smiled. A real smile, not the forced ones he'd been wearing for months. Even then, though, let's try not to make expensive life lessons a family tradition. We both laughed, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Tyler's house felt like home again, instead of a crime scene that happened to have furniture. 6 months later, Tyler and I found ourselves sitting in the courthouse for the final restitution hearing. Richard and Bianca had both served their sentences and were being released, but the legal process required one last meeting to finalize the financial settlements. I watched them walk into the courtroom wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs, looking smaller and more ordinary than they had when they dominated Tyler's life. Prison had stripped away their polish and confidence, revealing them for what they really were, small-time criminals who'd gotten lucky with a particularly trusting target. Tyler sat beside me, his face calm but alert. The broken man who'd discovered his family's betrayal had been replaced by someone stronger and wiser, though the process of getting there had been painful to witness. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Chen," the bailiff announced. The hearing was brief and businesslike. Richard and Bianca had already served their sentences. Most of the restitution had been paid, and everyone just wanted to close this chapter and move on with their lives. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Chen addressed Tyler directly, "you've recovered approximately 60% of the stolen funds through various legal mechanisms. The remaining amount has been written off as uncollectible. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I close this case?" Tyler stood up, and for a moment I worried he might say something he'd regret, but when he spoke, his voice was steady and thoughtful. "Your Honor, I don't need an apology from the defendants, and I don't need them to explain their actions. I understand what they did and why they did it. What I want is for this experience to help other people avoid being victimized by similar schemes." He turned slightly to look at Richard and Bianca. "I hope you both find a better way to live your lives going forward. Not for my sake, but for yours." The dignity in his response made me proud. Tyler had learned to separate his anger about their actions from his hope for their redemption, a mature distinction that showed how much he'd grown through this ordeal. After the hearing, Tyler and I walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine. The reporters who'd followed the story initially had moved on to other scandals, and we were just two people walking down the courthouse steps, having survived their own personal hurricane. "How do you feel?" I asked as we reached the parking lot. "Relieved, like I can finally close that chapter and start writing a new one." Tyler paused beside his car. "You know what's strange? I keep expecting to feel more bitter about the whole thing. What do you feel instead?" "Grateful, I guess. Grateful that I found out the truth before they could take everything. Grateful that I had you to help me through it. Grateful that I learned the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them." "And what is the difference?" Tyler thought for a moment. "People who love you want you to be happy and successful. People who love what you can do for them want you to be useful and generous. The first group celebrates your victories. The second group calculates how they can benefit from them. That's a hard-earned piece of wisdom. The most expensive kind." Tyler smiled. "But maybe also the most valuable." We drove home together, past the coffee shop where Richard and Bianca used to meet, past the neighborhood where Tyler grew up without a father, past all the places where this story had unfolded. But instead of feeling like we were driving through a crime scene, it felt like we were leaving the past behind and heading towards something better. "What do you want to do for dinner?" I asked as we pulled into Tyler's driveway. "Actually, I was thinking about cooking. It's been a while since I made your favorite pasta, the one with the mushrooms and extra garlic." "Sounds perfect." As we walked into the house together, Tyler put his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that had become natural again after months of rebuilding trust and connection. "Hey, Mom? Yeah? Thanks for not giving up on me, even when I was being stubborn and stupid about everything. That's what real family does, sweetheart. We stick around even when it's hard. We tell the truth even when it hurts, and we protect each other from people who want to hurt us. Even when those people are supposed to be family too? Especially then, Tyler nodded, understanding finally settling into his bones like knowledge that would never leave him. I think I get it now. Family isn't about blood or marriage or legal documents. It's about who shows up when things get hard, and who's still there when the hard times are over. As we prepared dinner together, talking and laughing like we had when Tyler was young, I realized that we'd gained something precious from this terrible experience. We'd learned that our family, small as it was, could survive anything as long as we were honest with each other and willing to fight for what mattered. Richard and Bianca had taught Tyler painful lessons about trust and betrayal, but they'd also taught him something valuable about resilience and recovery. He'd survived their worst intentions and come out stronger on the other side. We might be smaller than Tyler had once hoped for, but we were genuine. And sometimes, being genuine is worth more than being big. Sometimes, having one person who truly loves you is better than having 10 people who see you as an opportunity. Tyler had learned to tell the difference, and that knowledge would protect him for the rest of his life. Not bad for a family that had started with just a mother and her son, survived abandonment and betrayal, and emerged with their love for each other intact and stronger than ever. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning a new, better chapter. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.